So what is the 50-30-20 budget rule, and should you be using it to manage your personal finances? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's get moving forward. Welcome to the Plan Ranger, where our goal is to provide you with informed insights and a reasonable approach for managing your personal finances. Now, I've been working in financial services for almost 2 decades. The better part of that has been working as a certified financial planner. I can tell you that budgeting is one of those things that constantly plagues people. And you know, when you look for solutions for budgeting, you look at a better way of doing things. Oftentimes, people come away with those things with more questions than answers. So they'll look at a model, they'll take a budgeting model and they'll say, okay, well, wait, but was that pre-tax money or after-tax money? Or what if I'm doing my 401k, but then I'm also doing it after tax, and this is saying I need to save 15%. How does all this stuff work out? What if I'm making extra payments for debt or I have debt? How does that affect savings? You know, how do I differentiate the need between, a want and a need when it comes to my house? I need a house, but do I need a mansion? A lot of these questions kind of come out as far as how should I actually apply these rules? They sound great in concept, but I've got a lot of questions still. One of the major rules that's out there right now is the 50-30-20 rule. We briefly discussed that in our previous video about budgeting, and if you haven't seen that, we'll go ahead and put a link right up here for it so you can check that out. Kind of gives a brief overview of budgeting in general. But one of the major rules from a more structured standpoint is without a doubt the 50-30-20 rule. Now, at the end of this video, we're going to refer to kind of change the name of that because it should probably be 50-20-30, but we'll talk more a little bit about that later on. And while this is a great model that you might want to consider using if you're kind of at that intermediary looking for more of a structured budget methodology, it's not for everybody. So again, stick around with us till the end. We're going to cover some of the pitfalls and problems that people run into when using this budget and where it might not really fit your lifestyle that well. So the 50-30-20 approach would be what we would consider a structured, active budgeting model. Remember, and again, if you haven't seen the video, it's up here, from our previous video about budgeting, that everyone has a budget. It's just whether or not that budget is active or not, that is kind of the question. Do you actively manage the process of knowing where your money goes? Some people never take a look at it. Other people look at it all the time. Some people have a set structure that they try and implement their decision-making with, such as 50-30-20, where there's specific line items for each type of budget thing that they spend money on. Other people just kind of go around spending money. You have to find what works best for you. This approach is an active, structured model. And so let's kind of dig into what that means. One of the first things we need to talk about, though, is the fact that when it comes to the 50-30-20 rule, we're talking about after-tax dollars. That can present some problems for some people. And again, we'll address this at the end. But, when it comes to, well, I have a pre-tax 401k and healthcare and things that come out from my employer, or I've got this, that, and the other, it all comes out of my check before I actually see it. We're going to address that towards the end. But just keep in mind, I know that that's a problem that some people deal with when it comes to these types of things, dealing with after-tax money. Now, right off the bat, the 50-30-20 rule breaks down your spending into needs, wants, and savings. In this instance, 50% represents your needs, 30% represents your wants, and 20% should hopefully be your targeted savings level. So what's included then in the 50% that's for your needs? Often, one of the trickiest things here is that people tend to conflate the needs and wants categories. They tend to kind of say, well, housing, for example, is I need a place to stay. True, but do you need a mansion? Do you need a place that has hardwood floors and quartz countertops or whatever? Do you need a 5-car garage? So there's obviously some give and take here when it comes to needs and wants. But in general, when we're talking about needs, what we're talking about are the things that you need to live and continue to maintain gainful employment to earn an income. Those are the two things that would fall into kind of like the needs category. So things like housing, transportation, insurance costs, right, for your premium payments. But I'd also throw in there too things like covering your deductibles and things like that need to be included in there too. And that often gets left out. Childcare expenses, food and clothing. Not, again, things like, hey, I need a Gucci belt. Probably not. You probably just need a belt in order to live and keep your job, right? As well as minimum loan payments. And we're going to touch on that at the end too here, but just keep in mind your minimum loan payments would be included in that to service your ongoing debts. When it comes to your wants, the question becomes, Is this something you absolutely would die without? I mean, often people say, again, going back to the housing thing here, you don't need a 5-car garage, but you might need a place to put your car in the winter so that it still works in the morning, right? So this becomes one of those things where you have to be honest with yourself. And one of the worst things you can do is lie to yourself. And man, people get caught in this all the time. They trick themselves into thinking, you can rationalize whatever behavior you want. That's one of the worst things about people sometimes, is that we can rationalize the result we want, right? We can justify it. There's a classic saying out there that people make decisions based on emotions and they reinforce it with logic. So you want something and then you come up with the rationale, the reasoning to do it. By the way, I'm not perfect. I do it all the time too. So we're none of us are perfect. We're all kind of guilty of this. We're all flawed human beings in our own way, right? So when it comes to your wants, though, if you're struggling with budgeting and you really do want to stick with a rule, you kind of have to be honest with yourself and say, okay, do I actually want this or do I need it? Right off the bat, dining out is almost invariably a want, okay? Most people, it's hard to believe, cannot figure out a way to prepare food for themselves at home or figure out a way to eat at home. Not only should it be cheaper from a grocery bill standpoint if you're doing it the right way, but it will also hopefully be cheaper from a medical side, because let's just be honest, if you're trying to save money, or I can eat out cheaper than I can eat at home, you're probably not eating very healthy food. We're talking about fast food places that can hit those price points on a per meal basis. And inevitably that's going to catch up with you and probably end up costing you more in the long run than anything else right now. So things like subscriptions, entertainment, dining out, these are all perfect examples of wants versus needs. And again, if you couldn't keep your job without it, if you couldn't live without it, then it's a need. Everything else kind of falls into the wants category. One of the things that sometimes people try and lump into that can kind of go either way here is things like your phone bill, your cell phone bill. Do you need a cell phone? The 50-30-20 hardcore advocates would probably say that you might not need one. They'd probably say, you know what, that's not a need, that's a want. I might tend to disagree there. I think you probably do need a cell phone nowadays. In the year 2020, chances are you probably need a cell phone to get by. I mean, there's just certain things that you can't do without a cell phone, or without access to the internet or something like that. So I'm not saying you need an unlimited data plan. If you can hook to a Wi-Fi signal, if you're outside the US, you probably invariably use something like WhatsApp. If you're in the US and you don't use WhatsApp, there's lots of places in the world where people can't afford cell phones or cell phone, the monthly packages, to have cell phone service. And so they use WhatsApp and Wi-Fi zones to make calls and to use the internet and all that stuff. They just access the internet-based features in Wi-Fi areas. So there's ways for that to work kind of on an intermediary basis, but at least me personally, I'd probably say that if you wanted to include your phone as a need along with your other utilities, you could. Getting an unlimited data plan so that you can watch Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, all these things, and YouTube, of course, on your cell phone, that would probably fall into the want category, right? Finally, the 20% would be your kind of targeted savings. That 20% should go towards, on an after-tax basis, ideally for something like your emergency fund. And then once that's funded, then you can move on to things like IRAs or 529 plans, or, whatever direction you want to take your savings at that point, or investing. That's where that 20% would go. This would also include, just so you know, anything above and beyond your minimum debt payments that you're making. So if you make additional car payments, additional mortgage payments, above and beyond what your minimum is, what you're required to make every single month, that would go towards this. So if you're paying down extra on credit cards or student loans, that would be part of the 20% figure. Now, one of the tricky things here is that, again, going back to what we discussed at the beginning here, there are times where people have distributions taken out before they actually see it in their paycheck. So like your 401k or something like that would probably be taken out pre-tax. If you really want to strictly adhere to the 50-30-20 rule, you should probably, add that back into your paycheck. So take your take-home pay. Let's say it's $2,000, and let's say 400 was taken out before. So you take that 400 and add that back to your 2,000, and now you'd work on that number to try and calculate these figures for the 50-30-20, right? So you sometimes need to pull some of these things back into your budget, and savings is one of those things. The other one would be like your health insurance, generally speaking, or life insurance, disability insurance. So anything that's taken out on a pre-tax basis, you're going to want to add back into your paycheck so that you can look on a kind of a pre-tax basis. Here's where my money needs to go. I should be cautious saying that though. I don't necessarily mean pre-tax. I mean pre-withholding for things like your 401k, your healthcare deductions, or anything else that you're having deducted from your paycheck before it lands in your bank account. Those things you need to add back in, but leave taxes out of it because we're still talking about after-tax money here. So you want to add those things back in and kind of work the 50-30-20 thing. There can be, I should say though, there can be some hiccups with that, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here. There's going to be a little bit of give and take in this because as you begin to add that back in, you're going to run into some problems because invariably, you adjusting your withholding for your 401k could affect your taxes and things like that. So just be aware there's going to be a little bit of grind in this, a little bit. So I apologize for that ahead of time, but it hopefully shouldn't be too much of a problem for you. I mean, ideally though, if you're able to do your 401k and at least get the match or anything above that, and not include that in the 20% of your savings, so you still do your 401k and then you bring back your, you look at your after tax, your take home pay, and you can still save 20% of that, then you're really probably doing great. Then you're going gangbusters, right? Okay, so now as we get kind of to the end here, let's talk about some of the problems and some of the places this might not fit well if we're looking at the 50-30-20 rule. Right off the bat, this is kind of a personal thing. I think the biggest problem I see with it is the name itself, 50-30-20. People have a way of doing mental accounting. We rationalize and we count things in our head, and people tend to count their chickens before they hatch, and we prioritize. So when we say 50-30-20, especially in the context of needs, wants, and then savings, it makes it sound like savings should be the last thing you do, and that's the thing that you could cut at or throw overboard, or if you needed a little more for wants or needs, you could do less savings, and so that becomes problematic. It should probably go by the name, and this might sound silly, but it should probably just go by the name 50-20-30. It should prioritize saving above wants, but still below needs, in my opinion. I know that there are people out there that will call me sacrilegious for that. Yes, I'm a certified financial planner, and I believe you need to cover your needs before you move on to savings. You need a roof over your head. You need to put food in your children's mouths. There are just some of those things that have to happen before you start saving money in the realistic world, right? And to anybody that thinks that's not the case, I can almost guarantee they've never lived like that. They've never lived day to day, paycheck to paycheck. They've never lived with the threat of, being evicted or anything like that. You have to cover your needs first, and then you can move on to your savings. Now, once you've covered your needs and then your savings, then you can move on to your wants. If you find yourself where you get a little less sympathy from me is if you're a person who constantly is, hey, I need to do these things because you still need to have fun in life, and that needs to come before your savings. Yes, that's kind of true, but that's also a very slippery slope. And this is one of those things where, again, are you lying to yourself? If you need to have fun every single week, if you need to take advantage of every Friday because carpe diem, inevitably you're going to have a problem. So you need to be honest with yourself. And I would suggest that what you try to do is say, hey, here's the 50% I'll use for my needs. Here's the 20% after that for my savings. And then whatever's left, whether it's, if I win a little bit over in my needs or savings or whatever's left, that's what I'm going to use for my wants. And if you handle it with that type of discipline, if you take that kind of mental priority with it, I think you're going to have better success than the other way around. So a couple other problems that can occur with something like a 50-30-20 rule. And this is the case with every kind of rule out there. I'm not a big believer in rules in the first place, but let's just call them guidelines, if you will. When you start talking about how much you should be saving, this is 20% is probably a good place to try and start. It might not be where you want to end up though. So these types of budgets, while the structures can be helpful, it's not the end all be all. At some point, you're going to want to get a little more serious about how much you actually need to be saving and into what types of accounts you should be saving that money or investing to make sure that you're actually going to be able to get where you want to go. 20% might be enough. It might be more than enough. In some cases, it might not even be close. If you're 45 years old and you just started saving, you probably need to do more than 20%. If you're 18 years old and you're way ahead of the curve and, you inherited some money from, a late grandparent, you might be able to get by with 12 or 15. I'm not saying you shouldn't swing for more, maybe more power to you, but it's just that 20% might not calibrate perfectly with who you are as a person. Additionally, if you make a lot of money, if you're a high income earner, a rule like this might not fit you that well either. You might need to save more, again, because you make so much more money, but that also depends on your spending. If you're trying to do the whole FIRE thing, financial independence, retire early, you need to probably be saving well above 20% of your income. You probably need to be more like 40, 50, 60%. Even then, that might still be a push. Finally, we need to talk about kind of the geography of things. 50-30-20 is one of those rules that could work across, a lot of the United States. I don't know internationally whether or not this fits that well, to be honest with you. A lot of it would depend on what your safety nets are like and where you live and your geography. But if you live near a major city where rents are extremely high, that this whole thing might kind of rattle at the edges and fall apart on you, because if you're talking about, hey, I make $60,000 a year and I need to pay $3,000 a month for an apartment, that needs section might just consume part of your, a much larger part of your, of that budget. And at some point, depending on the circumstances, you might need to kind of justify, well, do I need to live in this part of this city to where I'm paying $3,000? Maybe $1,000 of that $3,000 of rent is actually kind of a want, so that you can live closer to work. And it's those types of logistical things that can come into play in metro areas that become problematic with budgets like this. One last kind of problem I'll throw out there when it comes to guidelines or rules like 50-30-20 is depending on where you're at in your life. If you've already got, a mortgage and you're, 47 years old and all of a sudden you're saying, hey, I really want to do this, you might find it hard to calibrate or to kind of fit the structure of your current expenses into a model like this. It could feel very much like trying to stick a square peg in a round hole. And if you really want to take it seriously, if this is really the model that you want to embrace, or if you find another model for that matter that you want to embrace, but let's say 50-30-20, if you already have a mortgage that's above and beyond the needs category and you can't sacrifice on the wants or savings category either, then we're talking about making some serious shifts in your financial structure. It's things like downsizing your home, which means hey, I'm going to sell my home, I'm going to move, I'm going to get rid of this car, I'm going to do this, that, or the other. It could involve some serious shaving at the corners of your square to make it fit into that round hole, right? And so you kind of want to be careful evaluating that. And that's where I tend to say that these guidelines can be better starting points for somebody who's trying to get into budgeting than somebody who's already really deep into their lives and already has a very rigid structure to their personal financial situation. So kind of keep that in mind as well. And so if you're one of those people who already has some serious structure to their personal financial life, maybe this is not the model you should be looking at. Put pen to paper, see if it works for you, but ultimately you might want to go a different direction here. So, okay, that's all we have for today. Hopefully this is helpful. If you have any questions, which I'm sure you might, please feel free to leave them down below in the comments. Click like, subscribe to join the Plan Ranger community. The channel would greatly appreciate your help, and we'd love to have you as a part of our community. And if you know somebody who's struggling with their personal finances, please share this video with them. Help us help them. Until next time, thank you so much for taking the time. We hope this helped.